Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Low Budget Review Show. I am your host, Eric Smith. Today, I am talking about Star Wars Death Troopers by Joe Schreiber. And this is from Ballantine Books, Del Rey. There you go. And this is an old copy. This is from way back in the day. Star Wars Zombies. Do I need to tell you more for the nutshell? Well, I will, eventually. For the too long didn't watch folks, 4 out of 5 stars. I really, really liked this. This is the second time that I read it. And if I had been rating things on Goodreads the first time I read it, I would have only given it a 3 out of 4, 3 out of 5. I liked it well enough, but for some reason, I enjoyed it more this time. Perhaps it was a lack of expectation this second time. I don't know. I couldn't say. I'm not that deep. But for now, 4 out of 5 stars for Star Wars Death Troopers by Joe Schreiber. And so getting into it a little bit more, you have this prison barge. So you got a bunch of Imperials running this prison barge, and then a bunch of humans, a bunch of different aliens as prisoners, and they something goes wrong with their engines. They find a Star Destroyer and are hoping to scavenge some parts, but something's weird about the Star Destroyer. There are no life signs on it. It just seems to be this abandoned hulk of a spaceship. But they go aboard, hoping to get the parts to fix their engines so they can continue on to the prison planet where they're taking all these people. But there's something aboard the Star Destroyer that gets aboard the prison barge. And, well, I've already said it. Zombies. So, first of all, this could be any science fiction zombie story. Star Wars is somewhat pasted on. Is it a spoiler to tell you what's not in the book? Well, let's find out. There are no Jedi in this book. There is no use of the Force in this book. It is a spaceship prison barge that hooks up with a derelict spaceship out in space, and something horrible gets on board the prison barge. There are a couple of big name characters that make an appearance in the book. I'm not going to say who it is because I don't want to spoil that if you don't already know. But aside from that, it could be any science fiction zombie story. That being said, it is very well written, and the tension builds up very well. Joe Schreiber starts by introducing us to our main characters, our cast of characters, and there is a dramatis personae listed. So you have, I'm not going to go over the character names because a lot of them are difficult to pronounce because they're aliens, but you have, for the main cast, you have a prisoner who's a Delphanian male. You have a captain of the guard of the Imperial prison barge, a human male. You have 2 teen prisoners who are both human males. You have Waste, a 2-1B surgical droid, and you have the chief medical officer who is a human female. Then there's a few other, obviously, there's more characters in it than that, and this doesn't include, obviously, the big name characters, because I thought it was mentioned on the back, but it doesn't seem to be, so they're leaving that as a surprise. But, so we meet all of these characters, and the 2 teen prisoners, which is, let's look. Let's go back and look. Kale Longo and Trig Longo. They're essentially our main characters. Uh, they're our main introduction into this world. They and their father were sort of grifters out in the world. The Empire arrested all of them. They're on this prison barge, but they're still trying to grift within the prison system. And we meet the doctor and her droid. We meet some guards and some other prisoners. We get the lay of the land, and then until things just go to hell. But it all builds very nicely. The character introductions, and then once this thing gets onto the ship, it slowly builds. We don't know, if it weren't for reading the back of the book and looking at the cover, we'd have no idea where it was going. So it builds very nicely. Great tension and suspense. And this is a book, since there's only essentially two big characters that show up. Anything can happen to anybody. Nobody is safe, except, of course, for the big name characters. But I don't know why I enjoyed it more this second time reading it, but I did. Again, I think maybe I had greater expectations when I originally read it back in. Let's see what the copyright is. 2009, 2010. So 14, 15 years ago. Maybe I had different expectations for it. But yeah, it's well written. It's frightening. Even if you're not a Star Wars fan, if you're not just completely against science fiction, you can read this with no knowledge of the Star Wars universe. You can read this as simply a really good zombie science fiction story. Zombie story set in space. It's basically one location. Two, do you consider your house and your attached garage two locations, or is that still one location? Because you've got the prison barge and you've got the Star Destroyer that are essentially attached by, once the Star Destroyer shows up, they have an umbilicus attaching the two for them to travel between the two. So basically one location. Two if you want to push it. Very isolated, which really works well for zombies. Where the hell are you going to go when you're stuck on a spaceship that's not running properly? And they're not the typical zombies. It doesn't go crazy with what the zombies can do, but they're not straight up just your normal George Romero shambling zombies either. I looked up Joe Schreiber. After I finished reading this, I looked him up because he's written plenty of other stuff, including the prequel to this, Red Harvest, which initially, when I read it, I liked more than this. I'll probably reread it soon, and we'll see, make that comparison, that modern day comparison. But having looked up Joe Schreiber, of course, they have copies that look like this, but they're, all these old Star Wars books are now under the Legends label. And I actually like the cover for the new editions more than this. I like this cover. Very simple and cool. But the new editions, I like the cover better. I may swap this one out, or I may just keep this one and get a copy. Maybe if I come across it at like Half Price Books or something, or find it on sale, get a copy of the newer edition just for the cover, because I really like it. If I could find a poster of it, I would just get that and not a second copy of the book. But really cool cover. I felt like there was something else. I got distracted by the cover talk. Um, but I don't know. Really entertaining. I had finished some other books and couldn't really decide what I was in the mood for. Didn't want anything too heavy. So for some reason it just popped into my head, hey, let's reread Star Wars Death Troopers, and definitely worth a reread. I had a good time with this. Lots of action, lots of interesting characters and character interactions, and I like the Doctor, and I like the dynamic between the Doctor and the other characters. Um, I don't think this is a spoiler. Like the Imperials, the people that ostensibly she's working with and for, don't like her because they think she prefers the prisoners to the Imperials because she treats the prisoners as a doctor. Um, you know, just let them suffer is what the Imperials seem to think, but she doesn't. She does her job as a doctor, so they're like, you're a prisoner lover. So fun dynamics, if that's the proper word, fun. Interesting dynamics between the characters. And of course, I mean, we know Imperials are just shit people anyway. Not completely true, but well, for the most part. But you know, that's like saying all Germans in World War II were shit people. That's not true, and I think the same holds for Imperials. Although in this book, they're all pretty much shit people. um, so you do have those characters. You're like, when are the zombies going to get to them? I want to see them just get ripped apart. And there is some gore in this book, possibly the goriest Star Wars book I've ever read. Can't say 100% for sure, but I think so. Um, so as I said, you have this, and then there's Red Harvest. Oh, I know what I was gonna. Speaking of Red Harvest, what I was gonna do. This has the timeline, the 4-page long timeline of all the Star Wars books that were out. And again, this is pre Disney, pre Legends. And this book falls. Where is it? Here it is. The centerpiece of the timeline in these old books is A New Hope, the original Star Wars movie. And so it's broken down into stories before New Hope, stories after New Hope. And so just looking at this, there's a section that is 10 years before Star Wars A New Hope, and Death Troopers is in that section. But if the section itself is chronological, Death Troopers is very close to New Hope in the timeline. So maybe just a year or two before the first movie. And then if we were to look, let's see. Red Harvest is falls between 3,650 years and 2,975 years before A New Hope. So when I say prequel, we're talking super prequel. Thousands of years. But anyway, so probably just a few years, couple to a few years before Star Wars A New Hope is when this takes place. For those who care about that sort of thing. Really fun. I wish there was much more horror Star Wars stuff. Being a Star Wars fan and being a horror fan, Death Troopers and Red Harvest is not enough for me. That's why I've been picking up. There was a series of young kids books, young adults. I'm not sure where it falls, but Star Wars Galaxy of Terror. It's like 12 books. I call them like Star Wars Goosebumps. I have 3 of them. Whenever I go to Half Price Books, I just look and see if any have popped up. 3 of them have popped up so far. I haven't done like a deep dive online trying to find them or anything. But as a fan of mixed genres, when you take 2 things that I really like, Star Wars and horror, and throw them together, maybe this is what we're going to do. People are going to watch this review. They're going to go out and buy this book. They're going to read it. They're going to talk about it, and we're going to have a Star Wars horror renaissance. Let's go for it. Let's see if we can make it happen. Star Wars Death Troopers, Joe Schreiber, 4 out of 5 stars. A lot of fun. Highly recommended for zombie fans. Star Wars fans, again, that's slightly pasted on. Sci-fi horror fans. Yeah, I don't think you can go wrong with this fun horror Star Wars horror novel. And horrifying. All right, there you go. Question for this video. If you're not a fan of something like Star Wars, let's say you're a horror fan, but you're not a Star Wars fan, or we can throw any other franchise in there. You're a horror fan, but you're not a Star Trek fan. You're a horror fan, but you're not a what was I going to say? NCIS fan. I don't know why I chose that one. Would throwing horror into that franchise draw you in? Not as a whole. Not, well, now I've got to watch every episode of NCIS, read every book that's ever been written about NCIS. But would it be enough to pull you in at least for that single book? In this case, there's 2 books, but say you're not a Star Wars fan. Whoops. Not a Star Wars fan, but now you've heard about this book. Zombie Star Wars, Death Troopers. Is that enough to pull you in to read a Star Wars book? Because it's a Star Wars horror book. Or if there was Star Trek horror, or NCIS horror, or any other, again, sort of franchise, or any type of thing that you might not normally be interested in, would the horror pull you in, at least for that little bit that was horror? For me, actually, probably, I would say most of the things like the Star Wars horror books, I'm already a Star Wars fan. I was thinking about the splatter westerns, which I'm currently reading one as of this recording, but I'm already kind of a Western fan. I've read plenty of Westerns. It's not my go-to genre, but trying to think of something I wouldn't. I'm not a fan of rom-coms, but I mean, the government calls Shaun of the Dead a zom rom-com, a rom-com zom rom. Anyway, I think even if it's something, I'm trying to think of like a franchise, a genre that I'm not interested in, besides romance or romantic comedies. But yeah, I guess if you throw in that horror element, does it make it? Is it a horror novel that happens to have romance in it, or is it a romance novel that happens to have horror in it? And of course, it's going to depend on the writing, because I suppose there are horror romance books, books where the relationship stuff is in the forefront. But I'm willing to give most anything a chance. I don't know if this at all answers the question from my end, but what about you? Let's keep it within just like franchises or something. Is there a franchise if there's a franchise you're not interested in, would horror pull you into it, at least for that little bit that is horror? Let me know in the comments below. If you have any comments, questions, or corrections, please put those in the comments below. Comments are open for spoilers. Just post spoiler warning. We try to be polite here on the Low Budget Review Show. Please like, share, and subscribe, all the usual YouTube stuff. And if you'd care to follow me on other social media, my Twitter is at Ronan5757. My Instagram, where I post pictures of books, comic books, board games, and fuzzy animals, is Eric Smith5757. That's Eric with K, ERIKSMITH 5757. And on Blue Sky, I am at EL Smith. That's all I've got for you this time. This has been the Low Budget Review Show. I have been Eric Smith, and until next time, read more books.